Planting new campus ministries has been a vision of mine for years because there's so many students out there that need what we have here. And so we really want to be part of sending new ministers out on new campuses for new people. So when I first started talking to Rusty about coming to the University of Delaware and his emphasis on transforming students' lives and on discipleship and on reaching out to international students and seekers, training up student leaders, it just seemed like God was calling Tracy and I and our family to the University of Delaware for such a time as this.
It's such a blessing being able to have Casey come up here. He shared the vision that God has put on his heart of planting campus ministries up here. And I believe God's going to be doing amazing things through Casey while he's up here as we're transforming, as we're planting, and as we're developing leaders for Christ.
Tell us a little more about what you're doing with Reflect.
Yeah, so many of years ago, our focus was on outreaching to college campuses at University of Delaware. And when I moved here, the board was like, we want to plant new campus ministries. But it costs so much to plant this one, we just don't feel like we can do it. And so after about a little over a year of just prayer, we started visioning and seeing what it would look like to be able to plant new campus ministries. And we presented different ideas and different things, and the board continued to move from there. And I remember one board meeting, one of the board members said, I love this idea, but we want to see you focusing on making disciples here first. Mm-hmm. I was like, yeah, that's what I really want to do. And so we started focusing on what would it look like if we just focused on making disciples and not focus so much on events. And not get me wrong that events aren't important, sure, but that's not our center. That's not how our ministry is judged, by how many people we have at an event. But instead, we started focusing on how many people are we investing into? How many people are we helping their life be transformed? And we realized that to do this, each of us can only invest into less than 2 handsful of people. We started out with saying, hey, we're going to try to invest into 12 people a week. And we quickly realized we're not Jesus. And even though he invested into 12 people, still one of them betrayed him.
I don't know, Rusty. You begin to look like the pictures I always saw of you. Go ahead.
And so we started focusing on what does it look like to invest in people, to invest in a few. And when we started doing this, when we started focusing on investing in a few, we realized that we can plant campus missions, not by starting a new campus ministry or buying a campus house or renting this or renting that, but instead of just getting people who are wanting to be intentional in the lives of college students, going out and meeting college students where they're at coffee shops or conversational English, as Casey has mentioned, or we meet them through game nights at places, or just through Instagram. And then once we meet a handful of students, we're able to meet other students through them. But by living intentional and having Christ in our conversations and all things, we're able to build we're able to make disciples and build communities for Christ. Mm-hmm. And we started thinking, why can't we take that model and put that into planting and starting new campus missions? And because by doing that, it totally reduces the cost and the burden of hundreds of thousands of dollars,
right,
down to just the support of one person. And as most of the people on our staff, we are partially or fully self-fundraised. That drastically reduces the cost to be able to start reaching out on college campuses. And you can even do it individually, and it drops and if you have a group of people like James and Allie down in Little Rock, they're doing this just on the side, and they already have a small group of about 7 people that they're meeting with, and they're looking at potentially expanding that or getting another small group going. They're in Little Rock. So it's something very simple but very powerful as lives are being transformed.
This is what I love about the vision. First of all, making disciples. Well, Jesus did say something about that. So we're doing what Jesus said to do. But it's simple. As you said, doesn't involve a lot of cost overhead. Doesn't start out with, a big campus ministry center and everything. And, later, if a campus ministry is started and later on it's going and that's needed, it's not that those things can't be added, but, this is reproducible. And honestly, I think it's the future, because in America, as more churches get smaller and smaller, and unless something drastically changes, that trend is going to continue. Churches aren't going to be able to support starting a new mission on university campuses with $250,000 overhead capital to begin with, and buying a big new house or campus center that's now going to be costing $2,000 a month to keep up. And so I love the vision, and I know we have Connor Brown on here, who is an apprentice with us now, and I know we all think he's started out doing a fabulous job and everything, and everything I hear about what you tell us about what is going on with James and Allie down in Little Rock, Arkansas. It just seems like such a fabulous job they're doing. And if we just follow Jesus, everything else will work out as it should. So in your conversation, you talk about investing a few, and you can correct me if I understood you right, but about conversations going from casual to meaningful to spiritual and then biblical. Can you tell us, Rusty or Casey, a little more about how you move those conversations along without it just seeming like forced?
I know both of us do it slightly differently, so I'll let Casey share, and then I'll share how I do it as well.
Yeah, I think to reiterate something I shared with Trong, just as an example. So, we put a sign out for Thanksgiving last year. Trong texts me out of the blue, and says, "Hey, I want to come to the Thanksgiving dinner." He has a wonderful time, but we keep texting. He doesn't start coming all of a sudden on Sundays. He didn't start coming all of a sudden on Tuesdays. Honestly, still don't remember seeing him a whole lot in December and January. He came to our home in February before things got shut down, and I know that was critical for helping him. So we're just. I will text him at least once a week, just checking in on him if I hadn't heard from him. I know he ran in as COVID hit. I know he ran into a rent issue that our church family was able to help with, some benevolence. And that seemed to be a huge catalyst for him to realize that we're here for him and that we love him and that we care about him and we want to see him succeed. And then as we got into this, even more, like, he was trying to get online with us some through Zoom, but he's having some computer issues. We were trying to use Rusty's webcam, and that was working and not working some. So we kind of hit a little dip in the early COVID, connecting with him. And then as we kind of got back into summer, we just kind of naturally started. He wanted to meet, he was wanting to get together. And so it just kind of grew from there to be something where by July, I remember somewhere in June or July, I started talking a little bit more directly about what it looks like to follow Jesus. And, not telling him today, but I just said, these are some things I want you to think about. And when you're ready to talk to me more about this, just let me know. And then we just kind of keep studying and we keep talking and discussing. So that, from November to at least May, it was pretty quiet. There was just some subtle connecting and relating in his life, some hospitality in February, some service, benevolence, in his life. So there were these catalysts. but then it just kind of slowly grew as we were praying for him and just looking for those opportunities to make the most of. So that's just an example for me, from going casual in November to meaningful. We got to meaningful pretty quick, but then it took several months to get to spiritual, and it took even another month or two to get to biblical. But it was certainly, it worked wonderfully in his life.
So two things I hear in there is, one, at the outset, he knows who you are. Whatever his intentions are, he knows that, you're a follower of Jesus and everything. And then there's some intentionality without you trying to, as we might say, pound the Bible over his head or anything like. There's some intentionality in the way that you said, hey, here's some things I'd like you to think about. And when you're ready to talk, now there's an invitation. When you're ready to talk about them, I'd love to talk with them about more.
And I do want the service, when we served him and helped him with rent, that was a huge spike in his interest and his paying attention to what we were doing. I could just tell it changed him to see us, want to help him like that. So that was a big deal.
Love wins every day. Love can do no wrong.
And I did want to say, I didn't see the chat box at the bottom, y'all, but under more, there is chat. Like if you do have a specific question, you can put it in the chat box there, and one of us will interrupt the other to address that as soon as we can.
All right. So Rusty, you said your style's a little different, and that I think it's kind of important too, because we have our personalities. You can't change who you are, and everything. So tell us how you might go about being who you are, how you might go about these conversations.
Yeah. So I do just slightly different. I like to gauge my conversations from the very beginning. So when I first meet somebody, I always throw out what we call spiritual triggers, or as what my students like to call one-liners for Christ. They're basically comments that you say and move on, and the conversation just flows naturally and it's not awkward. So a good example is someone asks me, hey, how you doing? I can say, God's blessed me with a great day. How about you? Or I can say, people are like, oh, that's really bad. What if my day stinks? Like, oh, hey, my day really sucks. I can use some prayer. How about you? And either way, the conversation, I put in my thankfulness and my focus on God, but then the conversation continues to move, and 95% of the time, the conversation is going to continue to flow. About a couple up here in Delaware, I wouldn't even say it's 5%, but every now and then you might get somebody that gives you this look like, what? Or I don't believe in God, or I'm an atheist. And, like, hey, that's okay. That's fine. So how are you doing? And so just by throwing those out, it lets people know that I am focused on God. Mm-hmm. From the very onset of our conversation, they know that God's important in my life. And so I want to give you an example of a student I met a couple years ago at a coffee shop. He was just trying to get a conversation going about comic books with people. It was when the new Avengers came out, and you had Thanos, not Thanos, but Thanos. And so he was trying to say that supervillains are actually superheroes, just misunderstood. And no one wanted to talk with him. And of course, before I go into the coffee shops, I always pray for opportunities and for me to make the most of those opportunities. So I started talking to him about the comic book heroes. And I was just throwing out little spiritual elements throughout the conversation. Like when he asked me, who my favorite superhero is, I was like, oh, Jesus Christ. And he just kind of chuckled and laughed. And he's like, no, really, who? And I was like, well, I like Spider-Man and stuff like that. And we had a great conversation. And when it was over, there was not a whole lot spiritual. Actually, besides a few little spiritual triggers that I threw out. But I was like, hey, it was on a Tuesday. I was like, hey, this is a great conversation. Since you have Tuesday, Thursday classes, like, you want to meet for coffee next Thursday or this Thursday and continue it? And he's like, yeah, that'd be great. And we ended up meeting 6 times altogether. And it went from casual to meaningful. by conversation 4, we were now in meaningful conversations over coffee. And I hate coffee, man, but this is where we're meeting at, so I'm getting hot chocolate. And our conversations just casually start moving more and more to meaningful conversations as I get to know more about him and ask him questions. So you like comic books? Why do you like comic books? Well, I'm an art major. Oh, wow, you're an art major. And so what brought you into art? I love art, I think God's one of the greatest artists everywhere. Look at his creation and the beauty he made around us. And we're able to continue to move those conversations and throw out God. By week number 6, I'm throwing out spiritual triggers, and I've never said that I'm a Christian, but I've just thrown out these little casual elements throughout our conversations over the 6 weeks. And he goes, "Hey, Rusty, I know you're a Christian, and you know that I'm gay. So why do you still get coffee with me and talk with me every week?" And that has given us one of the most amazing moments for me to share. I say I share the gospel for 45 minutes. What I got to share is the life that Christ calls us to for 45 minutes, because the gospel is but just that blessing. And he's like, all the other Christians I know always condemn me to hell and tell me my artwork really stinks. I'm like, how many other Christians do you know? He's like, only one. I'm like, okay. But no one ever spent time to love on him. Everyone tried to jump to those biblical conversations. That other guy tried to jump straight to those biblical conversations without trying to spend life with them, without going from casual comic books to meaningful, talking about art, and what called him into art, to spiritual, which is what we were having there, then to biblical conversations by him now asking questions about the spiritual stuff we're talking about. And so this is how I move it through, to try to throw out spiritual elements so that they start asking questions. They start asking why on these things. And then from there, we can move into those biblical discussions by saying, hey, this was a great conversation. How about we dig deeper into this next week? And they're like, great, that'd be wonderful. Great. And next week, we now have a Bible study in Genesis, talking about who God is. And so that's how I like to go about doing it. And we have a document we call the Live Intentional Missions, and it kind of gives examples of spiritual triggers you can use, and kind of gives that path and journey and what each step kind of looks like.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Chris Vaughn just said in the comment section, love is the key, seeing in the other person's face the image of Christ. And I hear you doing, you too, Casey, but I hear you doing that in your conversations. I was thinking how a word you talk about a lot, investing. Instead of just trying to get where you would like this to go, you take the time to invest in the person, engage. It kind of gets back to something Fred said last night, not what I would say, not treating people as a means to an end. But just loving them. If it never leads to them following Jesus, you're still going to love them, take an interest in them. But because you did, and then he asked a question, you recognize why you take, I can't remember how you asked, but why you take such an interest in me. So many other Christians seem to condemn who I am. Here, of course, here you are having coffee, not condemning, but you're having, hot chocolate. Shame on you, Rusty. But you're just investing, and it opens up an opportunity. How can local churches be supportive of campus missions?
I would say the number one thing is to start being a kingdom-focused church and not be thinking about having college students on your front pew every Sunday. Campus missions is not about getting people on the pews on Sunday. if that's our end goal, we need to rethink why Christ came and died. Our goal is to get people to Christ, and once they come to Christ, they naturally become part of that church.
Yeah.
And we've learned over our years with that focus, we've seen our local church grow more than beforehand.
Yeah. Chris Bond is on here. There's an example right there.
I think that lens that Rusty mentioned is so important. So, I think just clarifying maybe something we've already said is, normally in a church, we know the Virginia Tech ministry right now is without a minister, but there are families within the Virginia Tech ministry that are trying to connect with the college students that are there. And I think if you just find, one family, or you find a few folks that were at that university or still have a passion for college students, and get Rusty. I still need to prayer walk with Rusty more, but just getting them to prayer walk the campus and just bumping into people and saying, hey, what can we be praying for you today? And I've already learned from Rusty, don't give them a chance to say, no, like, do you need any prayers today? Because most of the time they're going to say no, but you just say, what can I be praying for you today? It changes it just a little bit, but it kind of, most people will then say something, for prayer. And oftentimes that will lead you to, 5 people. If you take an hour or two to prayer walk, you'll probably get about 5 folks that you might, have a connection with and get some kind of follow-up with. So I think just, again, like we've already said, no overhead, just starting small. I mean, I love Harold and Gail got us on The Chosen. I've watched The Chosen. You see Jesus start out at the beginning. He just starts gathering his disciples together, 1 or 2 at a time, and as he builds his team for a larger mission. So you definitely don't have to think big. I think that form of doing ministry is dying, like we've said. And most of that's for the better. So I think we're on the frontier here and have a great opportunity to encourage churches to start small, prayer walk, be kingdom focused, and God's going to bless it.
We mentioned the verse in our video, Colossians 4:2-6. And this is one of the key verses that has, I believe, really revolutionized our ministry. And I want to read it here and kind of break it down on why. Paul writes, devote yourselves to prayer, keeping alert in it with an attitude of thanksgiving, praying at the same time for us as well, that God will open to us doors for the word, so that we may speak forth the mystery of Christ, for which I have also been imprisoned, that I may make it clear in a way that I ought to speak. Conduct yourselves with wisdom towards outsiders, making the most of the opportunity. Let your speech always be with grace, as though seasoned with salt, so that you will know how you should respond to each other. This is one of the most powerful verses because we're supposed to be devoting ourselves to prayer. And so it's not just like, oh, I'm going to go to a coffee shop, or, oh, I'm going to go pass out flyers for a Bible study. No, it's devoting ourselves to prayer with an attitude of thanksgiving for what God has already been doing, but alertness to what God is doing. And then Paul says, pray for opportunities for him to speak the message, but also for us to make the most of those opportunities. So now we need to be praying for God for those opportunities in front of us. But as one of my friends said, Rusty, I've been praying for God to give me opportunities. But what I forgot is I forgot to ask God to let me see those opportunities so that I could make the most of them. And when he started praying for God to let him see those opportunities so that he can make the most of it, it really changed how he viewed his relationships with people.
Mm-hmm.
And so as we're devoting ourselves to prayer, and as we're making the most of these opportunities to have wisdom, it tells us to be able to speak with grace and season our conversations with salt. My wife and I were having a Bible study with a couple this morning, 2 students this morning before this, and we're going through John chapter 4. And one of the things that was pointed out was when Jesus was talking to the Samaritan woman, who he says, "You have 5 husbands, and the guy you're living with, he's not your husband." Christ didn't berate her for this, didn't tear her down for this, but he continued to love on her even though she had these struggles in her past. So that is Christ speaking with grace and salt, instead of downgrading her and putting her down like everyone else in her community most likely was, because she was getting water the well at noon. He was polite and kind and talking with her and carrying on a conversation and treating her as if she was a child of God, because that's what she was.
Right.
And I think that goes really well with Fred's comment about, and what we've already been saying, is not letting the labels get in the way of loving people. And so we're so polarized right now. When we learn something, sometimes maybe our first reaction is then to categorize them and stereotype them and determine ahead of time, where they're at and what they're going to do. But I think walking with them and loving them and pretty much just setting the label aside and just being with them, it's so, the labels there's still a lot of depth and understanding to why people believe the way they do, that it just can't be summed up in a label.